Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a rather cold day here in the frigid Minnesota. From what I've been hearing and reading, though, it's been chilly all over the globe. I've heard friends in Belgium, France, the UK, Netherlands, all talking about the chili on the willy right now. So it's a little bit of an Arctic blast we all going through. East Coast, same thing. Unless you in California right now, but they got their own mess over there all the time with earthquakes and volcanoes. I guess you get sun every day if you can handle some earthquake and mudslides. So that ain't me. But happy President's Day to everybody. Cheers to having a new president. Again, I'm not going to go on a long political diatribe here, which often means I'm going to go on politics for 5 minutes. But it's nice that there's been some recentering and calming of the political discord. And there's by no means unity, or a path to easy success now. But it's less of the obvious purpose conflagration. This last guy was really trying to upset apple carts almost daily, tweeting dumb stuff almost every day, and a lot of it felt meant to polarize. A lot of it felt like it was meant to have one group say it's about time someone says how we feel, and then to have the rest of the society going, really, you're going to associate with that? That's going to be your platform and your base? And politics and economics aside, his morality and his integrity is at a low bar. And all of his business dealings, personal dealings, no one has a good word to say about the guy. And for the right, which is supposed to be the conservative, more moral party, to align itself with a fellow of such low moral character really shows some hypocrisy on the part of the right. And it's not so surprising that the elite and the right are fine with that kind of hypocrisy because they don't really adhere to that morality anyway. But the Christian conservative base, for them to have embraced this guy, it makes all of your piosity and self-righteousness complete bullshit. It's complete fucking bullshit. Don't tell me you care about morality and same-sex marriage and all the stuff that you think is so important and Christ-like, and then align yourself with a guy with zero moral character, zero integrity, a liar and a thief. Christ would have beaten him out of the fucking temple with a whip. Believe that. You know what I mean? I go back to one of my favorite sayings by the man. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he knew that because if you had stacks of them chips, you did some dirt to get it. It's really difficult to not have walked on somebody to collect more chips than you need. If you've got more stacks than you need to have stacked, you've probably done some dirt. And he drove the money changers out of the temple. And I think that was an interesting piece of insight into a man whose values are very socialized. This guy was not a capitalist. He was not a greed whore. And he certainly wouldn't have laid down the gauntlet and followed this amoral person off into the wilderness of ambiguity. What message does that send to our wives and our daughters? To minorities? The things he aligned himself with, it's shameful. It's easier to say it now that we can look back a little bit and have a little hindsight, but he's still lingering. He's still lingering, and the cancer that bred his presidency is still ever populating the genes and cells of this democracy. And I don't think he even believes a lot of that stuff. I think he saw, and his advisors saw, a base that wasn't motivated to participate in politics, and they felt like if they got that base out to the polls to vote, it would change the outcome of the election, which it did. and nearly did a second time. Because normally that white bass is too busy sitting back eating NASCAR, watching potato chips and cheap beer go down their throat. They don't really go out and they just bitch about politics. They don't participate. But he got them out. He said things that resonated with them. And that should scare us, that we have people in this country, such a high number of them, that would resonate with such evil. I'll move on. Today we're going to talk about one record that's very light, fun, frisky, and one that's heavy and dark. And we're going to start with this record, which I'm going to admit I bought purely, well, for two reasons. One, I do like the GNP label, which Gene Norman presents. He was a West Coast personality, radio personality. He promoted events, booked jazz concerts. I think he had a lot to do with the big Wrigley Field concert in LA. And yes, LA did have its own Wrigley Field back in the day. But so I liked some of the stuff on GNP. It seems like some of the bigger names they get, they only get to release stuff by them by doing these live concerts, owning that those tracks, those concerts, and putting out Dizzy Gillespie that way. So when Dizzy was locked in with Norgran, GNP was still getting some Dizzy concerts by putting these concerts on. GNP has some great stuff. I'm not going to collect all of it, I don't think, because a lot of it seems to be very light and viscous, you know. But this April Ames record, the cover alone was like, oh, you kind of get a feel for what's going to happen on this record from that cover. It says April Ames sings with the Hal Heidi Ensemble. It says strike a match, and she's got the little match with the cigarette, and I think it sets for you a fairly accurate table of what she's about to serve us. She does a great version of I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire right here. A song that goes back to the 30s. The Ink Spots had a big hit with it, as have had numerous other people. I've always liked that song, in part because as a kid, Megadeth puts at the beginning of, I think it's Peace Sells, but Who's Buying, if I remember. And then they have this bomb kind of dropping, and it goes into the metal. But I've always liked that song. So it's fun to hear that on here. I don't hear very many jazz versions of that song, oddly enough. I'm sure there are plenty, and I just haven't noticed. But Sydney Skolsky says, "Me, I like singers." There's some great songs in here. Strike a Match is great. Kiss in the Dark is great. Under a Blanket of Blue is fantastic. Romance in the Dark. Where there's smoke, there's fire. A lot of the songs have smoke rings. Oh, My Old Flame is great. Whispers in the Dark. Two Cigarettes in the Dark. A lot of it has that kind of a theme to it. But it's a fun, light jazz pop record. I think, to my ears, she would fit in well with some of the Bethlehem gals that do a lot of the singing. You know, it's got some substance and jazz heart to it. It's got a little bit of blues in there, but she's still a white gal that sings fairly light without a blanket of blue. That's dope. That's dope. Yeah. See what I'm saying? Let's go one more time here. Under a blanket of blue. I like it. I like it. It's like I said, it's light. And you have to get to a point where you know what to expect when you put a record on. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. It's not very often I buy a record that's jazz and put it on knowing it's racial makeup, it's label makeup, it's time and era, and walk away from it going, damn, I didn't expect that from this. At this point, I have a pretty good idea of what label was doing what when, and what the context of that record's going to be. So when I buy a white singer on GNP, this is pretty much what I'm expecting, and it was really good. Like, a record that did surprise me was that last Throat Grabbers, the Eddie Costa. That record on the Dot label, that I was not expecting that. I thought it was going to be a lot more lighthearted, poppy renditions, and that record had a lot of guts to it. It was really hard driving. I was very impressed by that Eddie Costa record on the Dot label, where it was probably difficult for a white cat even to make a record that was serious jazz. And they certainly did that with Marshall and Paul Motion. But again, this record, it's not meant to be heavy lifting. And you can't go into a white pop singer, jazz singer LP on the GNP label expecting it to be some heavy Billie Holiday or Abby Lincoln. It's not what you're going to get from a white pop singer, even a white jazz singer. There's a lot of great white jazz singers. They tend to end up more on the poppier side of the scale, less on the jazz improvisation side, and less even on the blues side. And you really, when you're listening to a white jazz pop singer, you're hoping to hear some blues inflection. That's what you're really hoping for. You're hoping that when it gets to it, you feel some integrity, some genuine inflection, and not just a saccharine rendition. And for me, that makes the difference between me enjoying a record and me going, okay, that was a little bit schmaltzy for me. And it's a tough line to define. It might strike you differently from one day to the next. But again, it comes down to, what does the art make you feel? And if she feels like she's a little bit too refined and polished and has no blues, it's just all training and talent and technique. Talent and technique can be devoid of feeling. You know, that ego-driven ability doesn't have a lot of room for a personality or bending the rules. And sometimes the most interesting music is the stuff that bends the rules, bends the notes, bends time and space, and alternates between what's expected and deviating. But and that's a balancing act even there as well. The avant-garde for me goes too far sometimes. Free jazz goes too far sometimes. But it's all that balancing act. And a fun record. April Ames, Strike a Match on the GNP label. It's something you can find for probably $20. And it'll be perfect when you have guests over and you want to put on something that we can drink our coffee and Irish cream. You know, we want to share a tale or two about our workplace environment, and you ain't trying to have some music that's going to dominate the conversation. You want to just kind of be in the back, creating a mood and an atmosphere. The white pop jazz singers are great for that. Great for having company over and not making half the room going, "Can you turn that down a little bit? I'm trying to talk here." Most people aren't going to be too hindered by this type of stuff. So moving on, fun record. Now here's what heavy and dark sounds like. The Jazz Messengers by this time are a well-oiled war machine. This is the Orgasmatron. This is Defenders of the Faith, Judas Priest, the Tank of Destruction on the cover. These guys are a rolling ball of chaos and fury, and they attack all would-be oncomers. It's very aggressive, it's full of tension, it's full of the blues and feeling. This is when they're a six-piece, if I recall, yeah. And you've got Curtis Fuller on the trombone, one of the top 3-4 trombonists in this era. You have Freddie Hubbard, who by this time after Clifford Brown's passing, to me is the greatest virtuoso on the trumpet, who always plays with tons of feel and honesty. You have Wayne Shorter on the tenor, who is a leading voice in the mid-60s for the dissonant compositional edges of jazz and blues. He's very much in recognition of the past, but he's also very much pushing the music forward. And I think he's an incredibly nice slice between those two worlds. If you want to have some edge to your music, Wayne Shorter is a great place to go without it ever being too unlistenable or uncomfortable for those who don't want to listen to this right now. You know, Shorter's a great balance. Cedar Walton's on the piano, another one of the great Jazz Messenger piano players, and by this time Reggie Workman has taken over on the bass. And Reggie's a great player who I wish would have gotten a leader session at Blue Note, but never did. Workman's on a lot of Blue Notes too. Free for all. I figured on President's Day, what better thing to talk about than freedom? And freedom is a strange thing. You know, how do you define it? And most people, when they would go to define it, would misdefine it very much. the average American thinks freedom has something to do with waving a flag and freedom of speech. And the average American honestly thinks that they're the only people on the planet who have freedom. And in some ways, this is some of the least free people on the planet. The more indoctrinated you are by your television, the less free you are. The more fear you live in, the less free you are. And when you really break it down and ask yourself what freedom does exist in America, the freedom to operate financially, especially if you're the elite, unhindered by the will of the people and by the rule of governance. There's such a driving force in this country to minimize government because that's freedom. And I gotta tell you, the less government you have, the less freedom ultimately you will have. And when you're back working in the coal mine for $2 a day with no overtime and no safety regulations, no union, no health, you can have that freedom if you want, and that's freedom. You're free, no government. There's no roads, no bridges, no hospitals, no schools. I mean, you can go right back to caveman times with freedom if you want to talk about it. But freedom to me is like the freedom to know that I can walk outside and my neighbor has his kids fed, so he ain't looking at me like a target. That's freedom. Freedom's knowing that the people who live in my city all have enough provisions that we can all peacefully coexist, and that the things that separate us, like religion and race, won't be a factor because they're not targeting me looking for an excuse because they have enough to feed their families. If I can't feed my families, I am going to target somebody different than myself. And race and religion becomes a dividing line. Because we always want to have some sense of community left at the end of the day. So if I'm black and poor, and don't get me wrong, if you're starving, you'll attack anybody to feed your family. That's caveman shit. It goes back to the end of time. But freedom is a weird thing. And if you're a black man in America talking about freedom, free for all, this is what freedom looked like to Art Blakey. This is what freedom looks like and sounds like to Curtis Fuller. When these guys pick up these instruments, they embrace a form of freedom that's so immediate and so sincere and so filled with vitality and life and an unwillingness to even accept defeat. It's brutal in its resistance. And you can't help but feel the difference in the tension and the sound of what black artists make, especially in the late 50s, early 60s, in terms of a voiceless resistance. We're still not yet quite to the place where civil rights says you can say into a microphone what you need to say. We're fighting for that, though. And believe it or not, Wayne Shorter's saying that. Curtis Fuller's saying that. Blakey's for sure saying that. Blakey's also saying, let's get the session done so I can go get me some drugs. You know, Blakey liked his hair on more than the average Joe. You know, and he actually turned a lot of kids onto it. I've even heard some people say Blakey would turn his own bandmates, the young kids, onto it as a way to kind of keep them around Papa Blakey and keep his bands intact, even though he's often been credited with saying, you're ready to go out and start your own band now. You can kind of control an addict and manipulate their schedules and manipulate where they're going to be and when, based on if you be there at 9:30, we'll get high first and then we'll go on stage. And if he was a junkie and this dude got the money and the junk, guess where you're going to be at 9:30? You'll be there on time. You'll be there on time. And so freedom's a strange thing. And I think it's probably the most undefined terminology that's involved with nationalism and patriotism. It's just ridiculous to me how we throw the word freedom around without ever really defining what the F does that mean? Freedom for who? I mean, when you live on your couch in fear of most of the planet, and Americans are afraid of the majority of the planet. They're afraid of the Russians, the Chinese, they're afraid of the Arabs, they're afraid of blacks, they're afraid of Mexicans. Americans live in fear. Fear that they all coming for us. Any day now. Got my AR-15 here because they're going to come and steal my microwave and my Doritos. They're going to break my door down any second and take my kid's tricycle and my Cheetos. I mean, if everything you got in your trailer you bought at a Walmart and it says made in China, ain't nobody coming for it, brother. You don't need that gun. Ain't no one gonna come for you. You ain't nothing to nobody. But you live in fear anyway because the television has reminded you every day that fear needs to be real. So you listen to the tension in these guys here, the propulsion. They're beating away the demons of oppression and control. And sometimes you gotta stir up a big mess to really get what's in that tub circulating so that the drain will actually go down. You might have to plunge it even a few times to get those hairballs loosened up so this tub of oppression will drain. And this is a flurry of Hubbard and Shorter and Fuller mixing up a baton of here we go, bang, boom, I got you, we ain't gonna do this no more. And this is such a link between the advancements that the guys in the swing era made, the doors of those guys opened, the chance for black music to come into white homes. And a guy like Armstrong couldn't have taken the stance that a guy like Lee Morgan or Curtis Fuller or Hank Mobley or, Shorter could have taken in the 60s. You couldn't have done that in the 30s. You probably would have been lynched. So incremental progress was made between these generations so that these guys could say what they had to say. And of course, the next generation takes it a step further. But make no mistake, they're all saying the same thing, only they're saying it in a reference point that will allow them to continue saying it. Armstrong was fighting for freedom for black folks. Don't mistake it. As much as Chuck D from Public Enemy ever was. But he couldn't say some of the things that Chuck D said, so sometimes he just had to smile, put on that cheetah suit, and play in them white man movies, and make all the white people in that theater go, damn, that brother can play. Woo, never heard a trumpet sound like that before. And that's opening a door. Before Jackie Robinson, before Muhammad Ali, before Martin Luther King, the giants of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Count Basie are opening doors in America for the black advancement. And this free-for-all here is the flurry of battles being fought at the cusp of that great change called civil rights. And it's not like civil rights came along and changed everything overnight. We're still struggling with it. But freedom is a strange word. So I thought on President's Day, it'd be nice to address that somewhat. And this title track here, it's a war chant. It's a war chant. There they go, stating the theme again. And I think this is a Shorter original. It doesn't say there. Probably says on the back. Shorter does a lot of composition. First here with the Messengers, and of course with Miles in that next quintet. And this is from '64, so he's about to start working with Miles if he hasn't already. That transition, once again, it's a big label gutting a small label. When Hancock and Shorter and the whole crew basically goes to work with Miles, it's once again these big labels just cherry picking talent from the small labels. And it's devastating for these small labels to lose Jimmy Smiths, Kenny Burrells. The talent that was selling was always being cherry picked away. This next song is a little more rhythm and blues. It's called Hammerhead. And still a very powerful, hard driving, but it's like I said, it's more rhythm and blues, a little more mid-tempo, and it's got that snap, crackle, pop to it. I'm going to flip it over real quick. You can't have a much more powerful lineup, really, than Hubbard, Shorter, and Fuller. Hubbard for me. Reggie Workman. Reggie's a great bass player, and he kind of gets less recognition than he deserves. That's one of the things about not having a record as a leader, is your name doesn't ring out quite the same. When there's a blue note by you that people are all looking for, it makes guys like Art Taylor and Walter Davis more memorable than a guy like Reggie Workman who never got a record as a leader. Certainly was deserving of it, but I think he was actually quite content to back a lot of these fantastic sessions, you know. And whether he pushed for record of the leader, I'll never know. I'm pretty sure he's passed at this point. This is called The Core. It's a Freddie Hubbard tune, and yes, Free For All was a Wayne Shorter song. Fantastic stuff. And then the last song on this record, called Pensativa, was actually written by Claire Fisher, who makes some great records over on Pacific Records. And we'll jump to that real quick. And you can hear a little difference right away in this one sonically. You know, it's got a bit more West Coast delicacy to it. It's finite. It's a little bit more contemplation happening, a little bit less ferocity here. But it's a great place for these guys to work out. Because sometimes you want to take some of the attack off your horn and play a little softer. Because it allows you to hit certain notes and phrases, extend your breath a little longer because you're not being as forceful. There's things about playing at a lighter sound, lighter velocity, that enriches your palette and gives you more paint to work with. So it's fun to hear these guys kind of sauntering along a little bit more of a breezy afternoon, a little bit less of a hurricane. And, you know, I mean, when it comes down to it, that's what Blakey and the Messengers are. They're a hurricane of emotion, a hurricane of resistance, a hurricane of change in a world that was changing rapidly around them. They were absolutely reflecting that in so much of their sound. And I was talking with a couple brothers the other day on one of my Facebook groups. And you can't do this 100% of the time, but there's definitely a lot of records where you can blindfold yourself and listen to them and know whether it's white or black. There's just something in the urgency that even at bright tempos, a lot of the West Coast stuff, as ferocious as it can be in its tempos and its virtuosity, there's something in the urgency, in the message, that feels lighter in nature. And it takes a subtle degree of intuition and empathy to sense it. And I'm not saying you're going to be right 100% of the time, you know. I don't think I would be. But I think good 78% of the time, I can listen to a couple tracks from a record and tell you if it's a white guy or black guy. Not always. You know, there's some Bethlehem West Coast stuff that those guys are jamming hard. I think those records would fool me every time, especially when I didn't know them too well. No, I think some of those tracks, I'd be like, oh, I know this is from that record, you know. But I was listening to some Chet Baker the other day. I was listening to a couple of the West Coast things, and it just has a lighter feel to it, in spite of the virtuosity being incredible. What was the other record I was listening to? It was really good, but it was still kind of... It just had a lighter emotional context. And you can project that somewhat as well. But I think when I'm honest with myself, I'm pretty good at saying, you know, these white cats are playing pretty hardcore here, and this would be hard for me to tell if this is black or white. But other times you listen to something, you're like, man, this just has a fluffiness to it. In spite of its brilliance, it's still great. It's just telling you a different story. And that's a big part of how we hear jazz. That's part of the magic of jazz, honestly, is it's a masterpiece every night. It's a guy painting a brilliant piece of art in front of you, expressing something from his soul. And that's a really exciting proposition. You get to sit back and listen to a human share with you an immediate projection of how my experience on this planet and this plane makes me feel. And if you're not perceptive enough to recognize that the black experience in America has driven a lot of great art and expressed a lot of great sorrow through this art, you don't really understand your history very well. Because slavery doesn't end thousands of years ago, nor hundreds. Civil rights was in your parents' or grandparents' era. And the legacy of that is still interwoven into our fabric every day. It's not like that stuff's so ancient history, why can anybody still be referencing it? And I challenge anybody in this audience to imagine you and your partners to have been kidnapped and put in a place where you could not escape. and you've been there for 2 years, 3 years, and you've fabricated and found some little instruments. And these instruments are allowing you behind your captor's back to kind of express some of your angst, some of your sorrow, some of your frustration. How would that not be coming out in what you're playing? So on some levels, if you want to know what freedom looks like and sounds like, these men are finding freedom in these instruments. And it feels night and day different from the light, fun April Ames versus the intensity of one Arthur Blakey driving home the thunder of resistance and the opposition to oppression. That's the whole thing in life, man. Give me something I can feel. And you know why I give a shit about jazz? You know why it means something to me? Why I'm willing to spend as much time doing what I do for next to nothing? It's because I believe in it, because it makes me feel something. I spent my whole life looking for honesty, looking for integrity, looking for something to believe in. Politics has let me down. Government and nation has failed me. Religion is an empty circle of promise. I can feel something in black jazz musicians as they search for an identity and a place within the world they live in, and happiness and peace and safety and comfort. I can relate on some level to what struggle feels like on a minor scale. And when I hear these people and how they comment and handle their oppression, it moves me. And it's honest. A singer with a microphone's full of bullshit. He's way cooler than he's not nearly as cool as he's telling you he is. He doesn't get nearly as many chicks as he's making you think. He doesn't have nearly as many cars as he wants to tell you about. A guy pouring his soul into his horn, there's no room for fabrication. It's just the honest, guttural reflection of another human being's struggle and how they've overcome and found a way to get through the day-to-day. So here on President's Day, let's celebrate the freedom that jazz is and was to these men. And that's something that modern day jazz will always struggle to replicate. You might be able to make the right sounds, you might be able to record in the same ways and techniques, you might be able to put it on the vinyl and make it look and feel authentic. But unless your struggle is as real as it was for these men, it's going to be hard to capture that sincerity, that honest integrity. And that's partly why I don't branch out into a lot of the more current stuff. I'm there not just for the music. I'm there to feel something. I want to feel that no matter how bad I feel right now, no matter how big my struggle is, no matter how frustrated I am with my kids and my economic situation, that people who had it much tougher than me found joy and celebration in this life. And it edifies me, it builds me and confidence, and allows me to survive. And surviving is what it's about. And I can't get that from a 17-year-old kid who might be a brilliant musician with a degree, but he doesn't have nothing to share with me. He doesn't have any life experience, and he certainly never experienced oppression in this way. It's why the Bible rings true for people today. The words of the oppressed have value because they know what freedom means. They can quantify it and tell you what righteousness and justice should look like. It doesn't come from someone doing wrong to you for a week. It's when wrong's been done to you for generations, for centuries. It's that point as a people you can say, this is what justice and freedom should look like. And so if I can't listen to a record on some level and feel some of that guttural connection, all that forced tension, I'm not sure where it's coming from. I have a hard time relating to it. I just do. And so if I want fluff, I got fluff. I got April Ames. I got April Ames, who, how tough could it be for a white gal in California in the 1950s? She probably had it pretty good compared. See what I'm saying? So again, it's partly why I do what I do, because I believe in this music. I feel something from it. I connect with it, and it gives me a power to survive on the day-to-day, because it can be overbearing at times. This is a sweet Carey Price Montreal Canadiens Winter Classic throwback. And like I said, I'm bringing back some hockey jerseys here for a little stretch, just to kind of mix it up again. Plus, it's a little cold. It's cold here. It's like 20 below zero Fahrenheit today, which makes it probably 20 below Celsius. I know those numbers get closer together than the negatives. In the positives, like above zero, they don't really match up even close. 28 degrees Celsius is like 80 degrees Fahrenheit. They're way apart. Once you get below zero, then those numbers start becoming much closer. And I think around minus 40, they're both almost the same. Minus 40 Fahrenheit and minus 40 Celsius are pretty the same. So it's about minus 20 Fahrenheit here right now. Probably colder with the wind chill. It's been a cold 8-10 days, where your toes and your joints have a little more ache to them as we get a little older. You got to jump in the bathtub twice a day just for your own sanity's sake. It's President's Day. You'll have a good day if you got the day off. Enjoy yourself. Relax. If you got to go to work, peace, my prayers be with you. It's all love, guys. It's all love. It's all about the positivity and the power of this music and why I love it. You know what I mean? I'm not just up here preaching, trying to sell you something because I'm making money. I don't. I make a few bucks selling some t-shirts here and there, and my Patreon gives me about $350 a month, and YouTube itself, it's pennies a day. It's nothing. And every time my video gets demonetized because of the music I play, I get nothing on those videos. And those last 2 videos got demonetized. And so it's not about hearing me making money trying to sell you something. I just love what I do, and I'm passionate about it because I can feel something. And I spent my whole life looking for something I can feel and believe in. And that's where the power comes in, when you actually can connect with something. When it has a real, tangible impact on your day-to-day. As tough as 2020 ever was, jazz helped me through so many of those days. Helped me overcome my struggle, knowing that in context, what a brother went through in the 50s and 60s and 40s and 30s was so much greater on an everyday, a lifetime basis. That's powerful. That's what we need sometimes, that Band-Aid. That experience of having survived things tougher than what I'm going through allows me to survive. Props me up. So y'all be safe, be strong. We'll talk to y'all soon. I'm hoping that I get my last 2 guitar records tomorrow, maybe Wednesday at the latest. So hopefully my next episode will be part 1 of the great guitar players, and then the playlist will follow on part 2 and 3. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do it yet, but I got a lot of information. A lot of records are pulled. I got some fun stuff coming. Y'all be safe. Peace.